Hello, Senator Casey.
Yes, Doctor.
Hi, how are you today?
Doing pretty well.
Great. We really appreciate you being here. There's lots of questions going on in our community about the stimulus package that was recently passed and then signed into law. I know and understand that the best way to get money out to people and help out to people was to, instead of crafting like new offices or trying to come up with new venues, they started working with the unemployment, the small business loans, and working with avenues that they already had to get money to people in order to streamline it. And I'm just wondering, first, can you talk about what are some of the ways that people are receiving money through the stimulus package, details about that, and how that will affect everyday citizens here within the next, month or so?
Okay, I'll try to answer a couple of questions. Number one is the legislation we passed last week was signed by the president on Friday, was the third piece of legislation meant to begin to tackle this problem. And as you might remember, there was the initial legislation was about $8 billion for preparedness and response. Obviously, that wasn't going to be enough, but it was a good start. And then the second bill had a real focus on those who are directly impacted by the virus and families in particular. That was the legislation was about $100 billion, and that was signed into law about 10 days ago now. And then finally, the major piece of legislation, the largest of its kind in recent history, of $2 trillion, was meant to do a lot of things. It's called the stimulus, but it's really meant to do two things. One is to deal with the adverse impact of the virus. And as you know from the presentations you've heard already and from the news reporting, there's no place in the country and no place in our state that's safe from this virus. It's now in virtually every county in Pennsylvania. There's only a handful, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 counties where it hasn't hit yet, but it will. It'll hit everywhere, and we are all at risk. So the $2 trillion bill was meant to, first and foremost, to make sure that we're doing everything possible to deal with the impact of the virus. That's why folks on my side of the aisle push very, very hard for help for hospitals and nursing homes and other healthcare providers. The initial draft of the bill had 0 for those priorities. Now there's $150 billion that's been allocated for that. The other concerns, of course, we had, in addition to making sure that we could have legislation in place that would deal with those healthcare issues, and in particular could not just provide institutional money, but also this $150 billion, portions of it are designed to buy personal protective equipment, and lots of it, testing supplies, workforce training, new construction, all kinds of investments that we need. The investments in the healthcare infrastructure include Medicare payment increases to hospitals and providers, as well as more money for the so-called strategic national stockpile, as well as medical research, and you get the picture. We also wanted to make sure that small businesses were helped, and this is the largest small business investment I think any of us have ever seen. It amounts to $377 billion. 350 of that is for small business, direct small business support. Two other features that are most relevant to workers, and we wanted to make sure this legislation was a worker-focused piece of legislation, not a corporation-focused. And I think we largely achieved that. One is with the direct payment to folks who need income, and because they're out of work and they're in the most difficult, disadvantageous position possible. And that's basically to provide checks to individuals so that individuals can get direct help. That means providing $1,200 for a tax filer who's single and heads of households, $2,400 for married couples. The provision also provides $500 per child under the age of 17. So that's a direct payment. I would have preferred that multiple payments would be provided over time, and that we'd have payments that would actually be larger. The other side didn't want to do that, so we'll have to see if what we have legislated will be enough for individuals. And then finally, the unemployment insurance, which is so essential. We've never seen unemployment insurance like this, where we want to make sure that individuals can have first an increase in the benefit check by $600 per week, or $2,400 for the whole month, and that will take place over the course of 4 months. It'll extend the maximum amount of time workers can receive unemployment benefits by some 13 weeks. So, and we'd urge people to go to, in terms of getting information about how to get the process started, it's obviously at the state level, the Department of Labor and Industry Unemployment Compensation Office, and that's UC, meaning unemployment compensation, uc.pa.gov.
Well, wonderful. Talking about the stimulus, the $1,200 checks for individuals and the $500 for children under the age of 18. Can you explain a little bit more about how that money is going to be received? Like if there's a time, the time might be when it's going to be given out. Also, I've had some questions concerning eligibility as far as income, and I know there is income related and is income based. Can you explain a little bit to everyone listening and watching the income determination with that?
Yeah, the phase out of this for a single filer begins at $75,000, and heads of households, it's higher, obviously, and those who are married and filing jointly, that phase out begins at $150,000. What we want to make sure we do is provide, as when it comes to an estimate of time, is as accurate as we can be. There's no guarantee just because I'm going to recite what I've heard from the Treasury Secretary, but I know the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, has said publicly numerous times that this is a 3-week process. And I want to be careful in saying that, because that would apply to direct deposits as opposed to those who would be receiving this by way of a check through a physical check through the mail. That's likely to be longer. Now, unless someone on my team who's listening knows better and has more current information, that's my best understanding, that the earliest time frame would be 3 weeks.
Okay. And so when you say direct deposit, this is based on IRS tax returns, correct?
Right. Yeah, and that's how the determination is made as to what one individual would be receiving.
Okay, wonderful. And now regarding the unemployment compensation, I know that it's expanded, and I was saying earlier how, we're using resource paths that are already there. They're expanding unemployment to individuals that typically or traditionally would not qualify for unemployment. Can you tell everyone a little bit about who now is qualified to receive those benefits that were not typically able to get them in the past?
Well, for example, if you were, it's extended in ways that we haven't seen before. Self-employed folks, independent contractors, gig workers, workers with irregular work histories. It was meant to be as comprehensive as possible to get everybody, because of the nature of this crisis. This crisis is not something we've seen really since World War II. I don't think anyone could contest that. There's never been a challenge like this. So we have to put in place extraordinary measures because of the nature of and the threat of the virus, as well as the adverse economic consequences. And I have to say that as much as I think people in both parties work to try to get this to be as comprehensive as it was. And remember, when the bill writing started, this was no more than a $1 trillion bill, and it's now $2 trillion, and that's good because we need it, and we shouldn't be worried about how much something costs when we've got to get help out the door. And the administration has a heavy burden, and I'm going to hold them to it, to get these dollars out the door, to get the help out the door, to get any help that anyone needs because of the amount of dollars that have been allocated here. And second, I'd also want to point out that this bill is, and the policy behind it, as well as the first two bills, all three of them combined, it's likely to miss some features of American life or some challenges that people have. There might be defects in the execution of it. Just because a bill is signed into law is not self-executing. Human beings and federal agencies and state agencies have to get this help to people as quickly as possible. And there may be gaps or defects or problems, and we've got to try to remedy that not only in real time with regard to the execution and implementation, but also by way of a remedy in yet another bill, a fourth bill, that I think both parties and both houses are beginning to think about. But that's not likely to pass in the month of April. So we've got to make sure that April is a damn good month for implementation and execution.
Wonderful. Going back to the CV-19 virus in and of itself, can you explain the testing situation now in the state of Pennsylvania? Can you update us on, where is testing happening? Are we available? Are we capable of getting tested? Our local doctors now? Do you know where Pennsylvania specifically stands with testing?
I think I'd prefer to defer to Dr. Levine, who is the expert in the state and has been briefing folks every day in terms of an update. I will say this: I think it tends to vary. There may be communities where there are more tests available. In other communities, maybe not as many. But I don't think we have enough going forward. We still have I think statewide and nationally, still a very low testing number. I think there should be a lot more tests that would have been completed by now, because unfortunately, I think the numbers we have now are just a fraction of what we're going to see, because as testing gets ramped up, those numbers are going to go way up. But in terms of being able to give my constituents and your listeners in Indiana County a snapshot, I'm not sure I can provide that, but we can try to transmit some information that we have from Dr. Levine at the state level. But I wouldn't want to try to encapsulate what she knows, because I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And
I don't know if there's anyone on my staff who can hear what I'm saying and can weigh in on this if they have information that I don't. I'm not sure they can. Their voices are okay, so I guess they can't.
Okay. Can you tell the audience a little bit about Dr. Levine and who this is, public health here in the state of Pennsylvania, or the website where they get this information?
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. She's. Well, I'll make sure we get that before we go off the air, but I don't have the contact information in front of me.
And she is the head of the Department of Health here in the state of Pennsylvania, yes. And she oversees the COVID-19 issue right now in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, she's the point person for the governor. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Finally, I guess I want to go back to the money situation, only because we've had so many questions concerning and understandably local our tourist people that also are tourist industry here, although it's small. Also, people that work in restaurants or bars or things of that nature. They're being laid off. Some of them were fine at the beginning, at the beginning of the process, and now um, one or two of the weeks into it, they find that their business is no longer viable, that they're not being able to stay open and their doors are closing now. Um, and everyone's trying to figure out, can they apply now for unemployment? That was a question, even though like initially they were not affected. Can they apply now or in the future? Some people are hearing from their bosses that they may not stay open after the end of this last week in March and coming into the first part of April. Will they still be able to get benefits as well?
Yeah, I would urge people to contact the Department of Labor and Industry to start the process. As I mentioned before, that website is uc.pa.gov. That's how you start the process. And because Congress passed the legislation this past Friday, the federal government is still working to provide necessary guidance to states, and states are still preparing to implement all of the changes and provide the benefits. So we're going to continue to monitor that and make sure that it moves as fast as possible. But I would urge people to go directly to the State Unemployment Compensation Office for kind of real-time information about their own status, their own details. And we'll also provide information with regard to small business folks, because we want to make sure that they have the benefit of that loan forgiveness and have the immediacy of it. So we're going to be providing information about how best for folks to access that important information.
Wonderful. If you are watching now, Brandon just had online the site that Governor Casey was giving us for the unemployment benefits, and where you can find out all the information, commonly asked questions, where you go to start the process of applying, how do you contact someone if you have questions that are not available on the website. We appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you. Senator Casey, just to wrap up, I know that you have to go. I know you're a very, very busy man. Again, we appreciate you being here. Can you just tell people in general, looking ahead, you're talking about legislation that may occur that, they're talking about right now in Washington, as far as future stimulus, future plans for specifically for Pennsylvania, and schools, anything like that that you can provide our listeners and watchers today, as far as moving forward and going on in the future?
Well, I do think that there's more work that we have to do for very vulnerable populations, seniors, people with disabilities, children, and there's a lot more we can do that didn't make it into this recent legislation. So that's some of the focus I'm going to have is going to be on those areas where we still have to make sure that not only vulnerable people who are affected by the virus, but also those who take care of them, those heroic healthcare workers, folks who are working in hospitals and nursing homes, people who are providing home health care, they have to be protected and compensated and taken care of. So many people who are in grocery stores who have to work every day to make sure that people have enough food, they're challenged like never before. The first responders of all kinds, whether they're police officers or law enforcement generally or firefighters, we have to remember that these are the frontline soldiers. I think one of the best things we could do in the coming months or the coming weeks even is to begin to put in place an almost like a GI Bill for those frontline heroes. They are doing everything that a soldier does in a different kind of war. So we have to make sure that we don't forget about them when this subsides. I do think it's going to be a challenge, obviously, for the next couple next couple of months. And I know there's a pent-up anxiety about getting back to normal, but we have to make sure we stop this thing first and foremost. And that's why the social distancing and the hand washing and all of those very, very important admonitions are critically important. The last thing I'd say is I think for a lot of people, just having enough to eat is a huge challenge. And I think one of the areas where I hope we can make some progress in is making sure that if a child or especially a senior, if they are in need of food, we should be working to make sure that the retailers are working with the federal government to provide groceries to SNAP recipients, for example, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program recipients, who spend dollars on food and not only help themselves but also help to stimulate the economy. We've got to be very creative about how we get food to people who may not be getting it in the right quantity, as well as obviously the children who would get school meals and are now home. So a lot more to do on that. I should leave a contact number so folks have information about where they can go to ask questions of our office. Our phone number in Washington is 202-224-6324 and 224-6324, and that's 202. But also, of course, you can go to our website, which provides information about the detail of the bill, especially. It's kc.senate.gov/contact. So we'll make sure that that information is available.
Wonderful. It's up on our screen now for all those that are viewing. The information to Governor Casey's office if you have any questions. Governor Casey, we know you have to leave. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing for Pennsylvanians, for here locally in Indiana County. We appreciate taking your time out here to talk with Center for Community Growth, and from all of us here, we wish you Godspeed and continue health as you move on with your work for us. Thank you so much.
Doctor, thank you, and thank all those who are on the call. I appreciate your time, and to the people of Indiana County, thank you.
Thanks.